1 second. Please stand up. So it's good you wake up. Stand up. Stand up. Close your eyes for a second and just smell the coffee perfume. Just 1 second. Keep moving. It's good. You don't fall asleep. You know, now you can sit down. You are perfectly fine. You know, great. We have. Was it good? Was it good? Okay. I have a promise. I want to promise something. We will improve format because, you know, we are doing something with the future leader, future generation, but what we put on stage is something very traditional. Conference, dialogues, with you sitting there for 3 hours with no coffee break. Next year, it will be completely different. It will be more interactive. We will try to become young ourselves in planning the event. It's not enough to put young people in a room to make something for young people. You have to use young ideas, which we don't have, but we will pick up. No, Staffan? We are very good in stealing ideas. So, now, let me thank our 2 future leaders, and we get into next section.
Global warming. We're not doing enough. Time to get rid of fossil fuels. Who pays the bill of extreme weather? Energy transition, a privilege for the few.
So here we are after the coffee break. Thank you for coming back. Oh, no, okay, there was no coffee break. Okay, so here we are on our next session on climate change getting closer to net zero, which is a very nice title. But we all know that it is false. If there is one thing that we know, that the world is already off track. The main target when it comes to climate is to keep the rise of world temperature, the average world temperature, by below 1.5 degrees Celsius by the turn of the century. It's out of hand. I mean, no, I don't say it, of course, scientists say. And also, I mean, net zero by mid-century, Keynes used to say, in the long run, we are all dead. Okay? And this is, you know, the big statements that, you know, big states do. Yes, in 2050, 2060, okay, net zero is our commitment. Yes, but what are you going to do tomorrow, next year, while you are raising CO2 emissions? So there is a real problem to speeding up the process in terms of mitigation, in terms of adaptation. We have in our eyes, in our hearts, what had just happened in Italy, in Emilia-Romagna, where 14 people die for floods. Extreme weather events are on the rise, are almost unstoppable. So there is a huge need for, of course, energy transition, for adaptation and mitigation. So this is precisely what we are going to talk about in this session, and I'm very proud to have with us first of all, Mr. Fatih Birol, who is the Executive Director of the International Energy Agency. Mr. Birol, thank you very much for being with us this afternoon.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much from Paris. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So let me just ask you something, because at the beginning of the Ukraine war, we were thinking that it was, in economic terms, a sort of suicide mission for Russia. I mean, Russia was getting a lot of revenues basically from Europe for their exports. Europe was the biggest market. Still, now we realize that the revenues of Russia are still quite significant. It was not a suicide from the economic viewpoint. So Russia from this very specific point of view is winning. Is it a tie between Europe and Russia? What's your view on this?
Thank you. You are right. On 24th of February, when Russia invaded Ukraine, as I said, a new global energy crisis has been triggered. Why? It is very simple. Because Russia, as of 24th of February, was the #1 oil exporter of the world, #1 natural gas exporter of the world, a major player in the coal markets, uranium, and others. And as you rightly mentioned, Russia was selling a lot of oil and gas to Europe. Europe was by far the largest client of Russia. Why it happened? It's a long story, but to cut it short, Europe, in my view, made a strategic mistake. Namely, got a big chunk of its energy from one single country. In energy, we have a magic keyword, namely diversification. Even a country which may be your best friend, you do not get almost all of your energy from that country. You never rely on one single country, one single company, one single trade route. Europe made this mistake and paid a big bill, to be honest with you, because since almost 1.5 years, Europe is trying to compensate the Russian energy with other energy sources. Having said that, under very difficult circumstances, I think European governments did a very good job. First, unlike the many commentators thought, European energy station was more or less okay. Nobody froze in Europe. European economy didn't see a recession. And despite all of these things, difficulties, European emissions last year declined by 2.5%. When we look at the Russian side, Russia continued to export oil other countries, but at a very significantly discounted price. In sum, Russian energy revenues compared to before the war is now about 50% lower. So for me, the summary is Russia played the energy card, but it failed badly.
So it's not a tie. So you would agree it's not a tie. Mr. Birol, for sure, you mentioned it at the beginning of your answer, we realized in Europe that, dependence, oil and gas dependence, especially from one country, is a bad thing. So there is a lesson learned in Europe. But do you think that now Europe and European governments are doing enough for the green transition, for the phasing out of fossil fuels?
Yes, first of all, to erase or phase out all fossil fuels in a very short time frame is not realistic. Impossible. But bring the share down is a path that Europe is following. When we look at the European numbers, it is a strength of the IEA. We have all the energy data in the world and in Europe at our fingertips. We see a huge expansion of solar, wind, electric cars, and in some countries, nuclear power. Putting all of them together, Europe's need on fossil fuels will decline in the next few years to come. But there is still a lot of things to do, especially making the renewables growing much faster than it is now. And in addition to that, improving energy efficiency is a key challenge for Europe. So if I have to give a note to European governments in the last year, I think they got a very good note. I would give 8 out of 10 to European governments.
So thank you very much. Thank you for your time, for being with us. This is the applause also of our audience here at the Bocconi University. Thank you. We hope to have you with us again, possibly in person next time. Thank you, Mr. Birol. So now let me move to Miss Songwe, in particular Vera Songwe, Chair, Liquidity and Sustainability Facility, and co-chair of the high-level panel on climate finance, World Economic Forum of Finance, University of Chicago Booth School. So thank you very much, Ms. Songwe, for being with you. Can you hear us? Ms. Songwe?
Yes, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes, yes, we can hear you. So thank you very much. With you, Ms. Songwe, I would like to talk about responsibility. And first, the responsibility which lies on mature economies, because there is no doubt that the stock of CO2 in the atmosphere is the responsibility of mature economies. So my first question for you is, are mature economies doing enough to support developing and poor countries? We have seen that, for instance, the pledge to give $100 billion per year is not fully met. So should we do more, and how? Please.
Thank you very much. Let me first of all start by congratulating the future leaders. I'm hoping that you already are leaders in your own right. Thanks to the University of Bocconi, OECD, and ISPI for having me. I am not from the University of Chicago. Maybe you meant to say.
Sorry.
Institute. No. It's a very prestigious university, I take it. But the maybe.
Okay.
Listen, and then again, also just to extend my sincere condolences for the floods in Emilia-Romagna, in Cesena and Ravenna, and all that is happening. And I think this is very appropriate. We are seeing that nobody is spared from the problem, right? Whether it's developing economies, whether it's Pakistan a few months ago, whether it was the United States, everybody is in this problem, and that's why we're calling it a global public good. I think that the problem is a question of a stock and a flow. There is, of course, all the things we've done before to sort of contaminate and pollute our environment. Then there is what we can do going forward. We just heard Fatih Birol talking about the need for acceleration to renewables. But when you look at what is happening today, in the United States, for example, a lot of the businesses, the oil and fossil fuel businesses, actually are not making a sufficient return on renewables. They are making better returns on oil and gas. And so the investment proposition for transitioning into renewables is not there yet. However, what we've also seen with the United States government, and I think Europe is about to do something similar, is that there are incentives that are being put in the IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act. So the West finally is coming together to do something. China is also doing a lot. However, there is not enough that is being done in the developing economies. And clearly, more needs to be done. And that's why we have this conversation around a just transition. And I say two things about that. The first is that we are still going to need gas for a while. We are seeing LNG platforms being built in the United States and sent to Germany to make sure that Germany can get the energy that it needs. But in Mozambique, in Senegal, in Mauritania, in Egypt, we have gas in this emerging market economies. What we need to do is fund gas, because if you triple the use of gas in emerging market economies, we can actually increase by 13 times the use of renewables. which will essentially bring down the average of carbon emissions. So there is, I think, something there. The second thing that the developed world needs to do, and Europe has done quite a bit on that, is carbon markets. There is a big debate, about should we do offsets or should we do a pure sort of transitions. It's going to take a while for technology to meet us, for the shipping industry, for the agriculture industry, to get a better sense of how to reduce methane. But if in the meantime, the fossil fuel industry is making so much profit and can pay DRC Congo or the Amazon or Ecuador, because in DRC Congo, in the peatlands, we are sequestering in Africa 3 years of carbon emissions every year. But if we don't get compensated for that in the right way, those trees would get cut down. And so I think that we need to very quickly get a price on carbon, develop a carbon trading market economy that works well, that is transparent, and that is efficient. And I think if there is one thing as future leaders that you can do, is a market-based system for carbon markets that is global, is going to really change the dynamic in the developing world. Plus, carbon markets give us the financing. The 100 billion, I didn't answer your question. So we've been looking for the 100 billion. We're all economists, you're an economist. The 100 billion was promised, 12, 15, 20 years ago. Today, inflation, the 100 billion, maybe only 42, right? We have written a report, the Songwe Stern report, that says we need $2.4 trillion between today and 2030 to fight the climate problem. So, we are orders of magnitude higher than the 100 billion, of which we need a 1 trillion from external financing. If we can get carbon markets to work, we begin to get some of those domestic resources that are needed to complement the 1 trillion. So I really believe that this is an important part of the conversation.
Thank you very much. Probably you partly mentioned it, but what else should be done, especially by the governments of developing countries to spur private investment? Because private investment is obviously key in this fight against climate change and extreme weather events. Please.
Look, let me start by saying this, and it's an example that I use all the time. Elon Musk was going to build an electric vehicles factory in Germany. When the United States launched the Investment Reduction Act, he moved to the United States. So essentially, business is still looking for incentives, right? And so whether you're in Senegal, in Cameroon, in Cote d'Ivoire, or in Germany, you're going to need incentives. And that's why there is today a big conversation between Europe and the United States. So I think that is the first issue. The developing economies do not have those resources. We talk a lot about de-risking, blending, but even that needs additional resources. And that's why in the report that Nick Stern and I and Amar Bhattacharya wrote, we talk about adding a substantial amount of concessional development finance into the game. We cannot afford to have low-income developing countries increase their debt burdens to fight climate change. This is not acceptable. And so we need to find ways of buying down the cost. Today we have philanthropy, we have grants, but the most important source of financing is going to be, first of all, multilateral development institutions. Now, once you have them, then they can start de-risking private sector investment. However, countries need to do reforms. Countries need to improve their business environment. You need stability of contracts, you need certainty, you need bankruptcy laws. And then we have one big problem that we have not been able to solve as a global community, is foreign exchange. Today, it's very difficult, and that's why these projects remain expensive in the developing world to do, even in India or in South Africa. You're borrowing in dollars and you're spending in local currency. And so the gap, when we start having the Fed or the ECB increase interest rates, makes a lot of these projects not bankable. So we need to begin to look at how can we do more projects with local currency financing. This is a very important part. Or we get the multilateral development system to finance the foreign exchange risk. And just to give you a number, I leave you with this. with the increases in interest rates that we have seen in the United States, the emerging market economies have had $1 trillion increase in their debt service. This is an external impact. And so we need to see how we can manage that, I think, to be able to move forward. But again, the climate crisis is not a crisis of the developing world or the developed world. We're all in it together. And so we need to find ways of working in a global, international, multilateral system to make sure. Today there is a conversation about, let's focus on the top 10, Vietnam, South Africa, the coal countries, and see whether we can do a material difference there. But we can't do that, because if we did that, then Barbados will go underwater, Mauritius will go underwater, Seychelles. So we need to find ways of working both on mitigation, adaptation, and natural capital. We need to bring everybody in to make sure that when we fight this fight, we're not fighting it for some and leaving others alone. But what we have seen in economics is that any development program and strategy that is premised around sustainability creates jobs, adds value, and increases prosperity. So that argument, I think, is now clear. We can do climate and we can do development. We just need to see how we bring them together.
Thank you very much indeed. I really hope you accept my apology for the mistake on the university.
No.
You're not?
With pleasure, with pleasure. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. So let's continue now with our panel. I invite them on the stage. They should be just around the stage, hopefully. Please, let's welcome with an applause also our fantastic panelists. Have your seat. So, let me first introduce our panelists. Abla Abdellatif, Executive Director and Director of Research of the Egyptian Center for Economic Studies, ESES. Thank you very much, Abla, for being with us. Nicola Monti, CEO of Edison, and of course, our future think tank leader and researcher at the Ecologic Institute in Berlin, Benedict Bueb. So thank you very much to all of you. Abla, last year, COP27, your country, your think tank was very much engaged in the COP27. So, what are the main results? Is it enough? And what is happening now in view of COP28?
Okay. Thank you very much, Antonio. Good evening, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. COP27 was a very interesting event in Egypt. Our center, the Egyptian Center for Economic Studies, was very much engaged for about 6 months before the conference in preparation, in raising the awareness of people and in bringing forward a lot of people with green projects and raising the voice of Africa through a number of webinars to understand how Africa thinks and sees and expects out of the COP27. Egypt was supposed to be the voice of Africa on this conference. Let me talk a little bit about the positives and the negatives. On the positive side, Egypt organized one of the biggest events that have ever taken place under the UN umbrella. The conference took place at a time which was critical because this was following the Ukraine war, so there were issues about whether it would take place or not. And we had in the blue zone, which is usually the zone where the government operates, there was actually a pavilion for the civil society. And this was something new and meant to reflect what's happening in the civil society and have its implications on the conference itself. As far as the decisions are concerned, the most important decision was the loss and damage fund. It was 3 decades of thinking and thinking and thinking in order to get it. So it was actually out as an announcement on that day. There were also a lot of regional agreements that took place through summits that were taken by our president and Saudi Arabia and Cyprus for regional cooperation on the green side. There were a lot of agreements between different individual countries and financial organizations to support their efforts in green transition, okay? And of course, there was the regular agenda of COP from one round to the other, making baby steps on every item. On the negative side, okay? And this is really important. The loss and damage fund was just an empty box, okay? It was announced, but there was nothing in it. There was no fund. There was no agreement between the developed countries on the amount of money that will go in there, on the criteria for who to benefit, okay? And what are the terms and how the money is going to be divided between all the players.
Do you think, Abla, that in view of the COP28, they will be able to find a compromise or a common ground on that?
I doubt very much, okay? Unfortunately, I doubt very much.
No.
All right.
Sincere.
So this is, I'm very straightforward. So this is actually the situation. We added an extra day to the conference for them to try and reach an agreement, and they didn't. They finished the conference at 4 a.m., actually, in attempts to. And the concept, of course, the issue was who contributes how much, okay? And it didn't make any sense that you would expect a country that has been benefiting for 2 centuries from using fossil fuels in every aspect of their life and achieving development and so on would contribute the same as a country that is just starting. Okay, so the responsibility, the contribution has to be equivalent and proportional to the responsibility. On the negative side as well, there is always the financial problem, or not enough finance in order to achieve the mitigation and the adaptation targets. There is the target of the $100 billion, which interestingly enough was supposed to be symbolic. It's not, it was supposed to be symbolic, and then it became the amount, and it was never achieved fully, which is actually very interesting. Not fully.
A good thing if
there is a possibility that in 28 that will be achieved, but then it's funny that what is needed are actually trillions of dollars, okay? So it's way, way more than this, but even this small amount was not done. Also on the negative side, and it's all in the hands of the developed countries, by the way, Egyptian presidency has nothing to do with it, okay, was they were supposed to try and reduce the emissions because with the way they are handling things, the target, the net zero target, will never be achieved. So they were supposed to reduce the emissions, more promise, more reduction, and this did not take place. Yes, it's true, some individual countries benefited from agreements, but globally, the world really did not benefit. Even on the civil society front in the blue zone, they were having all sorts of contributions and ideas and innovation and so on, but there is no bridge between the two. I mean, so the ideas there do not reach the negotiations, and if they are lucky, it would simply be the year after. This was actually on the negative side. On COP28, it's expected there will still be disagreement between the two. Developing countries are supposed to try and link together the climate issue with poverty because it's important. The typical agenda of COP28 will continue with baby steps. It's literally like standing on the treadmill. Okay, so everybody is moving. And one last word on the COP28, because this is a bit alarming. The presidency of Emirates, okay, the president of the conference is the chair of the company for natural and oil in Emirates, and he made some statements. And the statements made it look like, okay, that let's reduce the emissions and while we are working on the other. So this means that there are intentions perhaps of not going that far, and this would be very appealing for the West, which suddenly found coal to be very nice immediately after the Ukraine war. Thank you.
So your expectations are not very high. Nicola, CEO of Edison. You recently mentioned that green transition will not be possible only relying on renewables. Also, nuclear energy is required. So, in order to really exploit the potential of the nuclear power, what is required? Why are not really investing so much, if that is the case, if it can really be of help?
First of all, I would like to share what you said about the inequalities in which the world lives today, and also energy is part of that. If you imagine energy consumption per capita in the US is double than the one in China, and it's 10 times energy consumption per capita in Africa. So the way that we in the Western world or in Europe look at energy transition is slightly different from other parts of the world, because the other part of the world may have different priorities. Now, to solve the energy issue, first of all, I think we are all convinced that we need to take care of the world because we have only one planet, and the issue of green gases is really becoming an issue. So climate change is an issue. Now, to resolve the energy issue is a complicated equation because you need to provide to all countries, all people, security of energy, affordable energy, economically, and decarbonized energy. So we have technologies which can give a solution, like renewable energy sources, wind and solar. During the past 20 years, the energy has invested a lot of money industrializing and producing wind turbines and solar panels with a very large economy of scale, and the cost of producing renewable energy went down in the past 10 years, almost has been reduced by 50%. So great achievement, but it's not enough. Renewable energy sources only can run and operate when we have sun and when we have wind, and we cannot program energy production when we need energy. So we need to combine renewable energy sources with technologies which allow us to store electricity, and there are different technologies currently under development, and also combine that with programmable energy. Programmable energy means today we still have a lot of coal fire power plants, which of course are probably the most important emitters of CO2 in the atmosphere, and we need to get rid of coal and use gas as a transition fuel. Natural gas is part of the solution. The other part of the solution is nuclear. I've seen the plans from the International Energy Agency, which in order to reach decarbonization at 2050, we would probably need to double at world level nuclear power generation. It doesn't mean that power generation based on nuclear will be the primary source of energy. The primary source of energy will be renewables, definitely. But then we need to combine that with storage, with gas-fired power plants, and with nuclear. And the nuclear industry went through a dramatic development in technology in the past 20 years. So we now have available technology, which is based on enriched uranium, but we're looking for fourth generation of nuclear, which is supposed to use wastes generated by the previous generation, or
so
use
it's not
different
Zaporizhzhia.
fuels.
It's not Zaporizhzhia, because now we're going to talk about Zaporizhzhia. It's not the same nuclear plant. It's a totally different technology.
Totally different, and we're also looking at fusion. I would not see fusion power generation being running in the next decades, but probably it will come in 2050. We have to invest a lot of innovation, technology, in order really to meet the 2050 net zero commitment.
Thank you, man. Thank you very much. Both of you mentioned, of course, that we have one planet, and in one planet we have a limited amount of water and clean water, which is really an issue. Of course, it was always an issue for poor countries, but also now for emerging and rich countries. So what should we do for clean water and the availability of it?
Yeah, thank you for this question, Antonio. Really happy to be here and have the opportunity to speak on this topic. Actually, let me refer to a study that I just read last week, which came out in the journal Science, where they found that more than 50% of large lakes all around the world have diminished in water volumes over the last 30 years. And I think this is really alarming, and this really also underlines the severity of this crisis. And I mean, we saw it all around. We saw it here in northern Italy. We saw it in Spain recently. We see it in Africa. We see it in South Asia, which is currently experiencing a dry spell, heat wave as well. So yeah, it's a very severe issue. And when it comes to the causes of this, it's of course the climate crisis. It's global heating, but it's also overconsumption, abstraction of water. So when we look at solutions, I think we always have to consider these costs, of course. Then there's also one very important aspect that we've been working or researching on a lot, is this whole issue of governance on different levels. So governance at the very local level, at the national level, but also at the global level. Because what we've been realizing is that these governance arrangements are not sufficiently or not sufficient to deal with this crisis that we're facing. For example, when it comes to drought management, there are some countries that are, I would say, pretty advanced on this, like Spain, for example, but there is a kind of architecture missing still. And then maybe referring back to the global level, because I think it's also important in this conference or here to talk about the global implications. So there was actually two months ago, there was a UN conference on water, which I was quite happy to see it because it took a long time to finally have such a conference organized by the UN solely on this topic. And on the other hand, it's, I think, kind of astonishing that it took so long because, as we all know, water is so essential to human life and all life on Earth. And I think this is really important also to push it on a global level and to coordinate at different levels, because when we talk about the water crisis, we also talk about transboundary problems, for example, between different countries, but then also going back really to the local level. And of course, there are a lot of very technical measures. I won't go into detail, I'm not an engineer, but of course, more efficient irrigation, agriculture is a big issue. Also, data, sharing data, digitalization, these are some issues that there's still some work to do. And then coming back to governance again, because this is it's close to my heart, this issue. So I would really say it's really also a governance crisis that we're facing. And because there are so many uncertainties when it comes to how droughts will evolve, how severe they will become over the next years, we really need to adapt or develop governance arrangements that are kind of flexible and adaptive, because there's so much uncertainty in the future, so that we can also react to how things will evolve. And it was already said a couple of times during your conference, there's so many interconnections between different crises that we're currently facing, so we have to think systemically.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Of course, strictly related to water scarcity is biodiversity, and the UN pledge in particular to stop biodiversity loss by 2030. Also on this, are we off track?
Yes, we are very much off track, and it's not surprising, okay?
No.
To be on track, okay, there are things that we need to worry about and take care of. First of all, we need to start from the roots. There is a lot of awareness of the importance of the existence of biodiversity that people don't see. The loss of biodiversity is like a silent killer. It's not going to happen today or tomorrow, but it destroys the infrastructure which supports life on this planet, water, air, everything. Right? So starting from the roots, increasing awareness, having businesses involved, because projects can destroy the planet, is important. Second one, I think it's important also to have international cooperation in this, because it affects everybody. Third, there is always, of course, again, the financial barrier. And the financial barrier needs to be there to stop the climate damage, which is really one of the causes behind the loss of diversity, so it's a vicious circle. And to stop things, they always say, let's stop deforestation. Well, deforestation is there because of poverty in Africa. 600 million people in Africa do not have clean cooking, which means they use wood in order to cook. So, I mean, it's because of poverty. It's all linked together. The biggest problem is to deal with those two issues separately, the climate damage and the biodiversity issue. It's looked at separately, and it's actually very strange, because the Western countries are putting a lot of money and a lot of talks about the biodiversity and protection and so on, and yet they do not want to comply with what they need to do. So they're literally shooting themselves in the foot. It's all the same issue, it's all the same problem, and it will not be solved unless the South has a louder voice in this entire thing, because this is really the core of the problem. Everything else is a symptom.
Always on this, let me just keep it, then I go back to you. On restoring natural ecosystems, what else, in your view, should be done? I mean, you are a future leader. If you think in 10, 15, 20 years from here, what should be done?
So I think it is very interesting to see that over the last couple of years, this whole issue of ecosystem-based climate adaptation is really becoming a topic of high relevance also at global level, but also at national level. So I think this is quite good, because actually all these ecosystem-based approaches, they are very multifunctional. So they can serve climate adaptation purposes, but also biodiversity purposes and disaster risk reduction. And so this is really, I think, one of the key strengths. And they're also cost effective, although, and I totally agree with you on this, that there is a lack of funding on this, and there needs to be more efforts to fund these solutions. But for example, or one of the prime examples a lot of people like to refer to is mangrove restoration, so the restoration of mangrove forests, which are a very common ecosystem in the global south. And I mean, they serve a lot of different functions, these mangroves. They can buffer in terms of flood events. They can also work as buffer zones in times of sea level rise. They also provide income for local farmers, fishermen, etc. And they also help climate mitigation when it comes to storing carbon in the roots. So this is one of the good examples that show nature can really help us facing these interlinked crises. And I guess that's one of the great advantages. But then also when it comes to the global level, of course, we have the SDGs. We have a lot of initiatives going on. We had the biodiversity COP in Montreal last year, which definitely had some really good outcomes. However, there is sometimes this disconnect between action on the ground and then what is written on paper. So it's really interesting to see that there are a lot of great initiatives also now happening at the local level, at the regional level. So I think it's also the regional governments really pushing this forward. A lot of cities pushing this forward. I was surprised to see all these green roofs here in Milan, which is quite nice. And then there are concepts like the sponge city, so that cities can store water during rain events and then slowly releasing it during droughts. Also using green areas, increasing the green areas in the city. So there are so many great examples. However, again, also here, one thing I think which is very important is participation of local people, involving really the people that are actually then also using these nature-based solutions, or involving them in the process of designing these solutions, because in the end they're also the ones that are most likely to maintain them. So I think communication and participation is really key here.
Thank you. I have a last question for you, Monty. Energy efficiency is key to net zero, together with the green hydrogen, capture of CO2 emissions, batteries, and storage. But the cost of the latter are not going down fast enough, and more investment is needed. So how to turn all this potential into reality in time for a net zero world in 2050?
Yeah, so energy efficiency is the easiest way to reduce emissions. Easy. There's a clear example. Last year we had prices of energy going up to the roof because of the crisis. And we were able in Europe to save 15% energy, gas and electricity during winter without any major difficulty, simply because the cost of energy was really very high, and all of us, even at home, we made all of our best in order to reduce consumptions. So there's still a lot to do, and I think energy saving overall can be, in Europe especially, able to resolve and reduce about a fourth of the consumption that we have today. It is not enough. The second best solution to be more efficient is to electrify consumptions. So using electricity largely in the industry sector also is the best way to save emissions, and is much more efficient than using hydrocarbons. Then all the rest, we have a lot of new technologies to be explored. Hydrogen. Hydrogen is not a primary energy source, but is a way to store energy and reuse it. But today the cost of producing and using hydrogen is 3 to 5 times the cost of an alternative fuel. So we need to finance the hydrogen industry, as we need to finance all the technologies which today we know but are not affordable to store energy. Also carbon capture and sequestration is one of the solutions that we need to put in place and industrialize in order to reduce emissions. All those solutions need a great financial effort from the industrial community. So all the companies in the industry like us, we're spending a lot more money in innovation in order to find the appropriate way to industrialize a solution and to create the economy of scale, which at the end of the day will allow one of those solutions. We don't know exactly which one, but probably we need all the components that we know today in order to reduce emissions. And then, if you look at the Horizon 2050, probably we need a technological breakthrough that we do not know yet, maybe nuclear fusion, which will finally allow to reach that target and to then survive for the rest of our life and for the future of the planet and for the new generations to live in a better planet.
Thank you very much. But before we close this session, there is one last aspect about energy that we have to talk about, which is the link between energy and security. Security stricto sensu, meaning also, life and livelihoods. And I would like to talk about it with Rafael Grossi. Rafael Grossi is Director General of the International Atomic Energy Agency. And in particular, he has been very vocal when it comes to the situation of the nuclear plant in Zaporizhia, of course, with missiles, getting very close and a catastrophe which could be just around the corner. So I have a question for Mr. Grossi. You visited the Zaporizhia nuclear plant in Ukraine. What can the international community and your agency in particular do to reduce the risk of a nuclear disaster in Zaporizhia? Please.
Well, first of all, let me thank you, Bocconi, ISPI, OECD, for this opportunity to participate in your event. For me, as Director General of the IEA, it is very important to have an opportunity to exchange views, to participate in events where the analysis and the assessment of what is going on takes place. So also from our side, my recognition. On the situation on this nuclear power plant, I should say that what we have to have a little bit of perspective. What we are witnessing there is indeed unique. Unique in the sense that for the first time, we have a large conventional war which is unfolding in the territory of a country that has a vast nuclear infrastructure. Of course, we are focusing on Zaporizhia because Zaporizhia has been occupied. Zaporizhia is in occupied territory, but we should not forget about Chernobyl. We should not forget about Rivne, Melnitsky, South Ukraine, all important facilities that have been in one way or another under threat. Chernobyl, we should not forget, was also occupied at the beginning of the war. Then the Russian troops withdrew when the strategic aims of the war changed from west to east. Sorry. But I wanted to mention this because it's important, and the IEA is deployed in the entire country. When it comes to Zaporizhia, as I said, unique first of all because it's lying on the front line. It's not only near the war zone, it's on the front line. So this should not be forgotten because this is very close to the point of contact between the troops from one side and the other. Every time we go to Zaporizhia, and I've been to Ukraine 7 times, and to Zaporizhia twice. And every time we do, we have to cross the front line. We leave the last Ukrainian checkpoint, then you go into no man's land for a few kilometers. And we were under fire there, I must say, the first time we went, and then until you get to the first Russian checkpoint, which is an incredibly dramatic experience, as you can imagine, when you see the contact point between two armies at war. So this is no fiction, this is no Netflix. This is the real thing. And this nuclear power plant, 6 nuclear reactors, the largest in Europe, 6 gigawatts of installed capacity, which means that you have an accumulation of nuclear material there in the form of fuel inside the reactors, in the form of spent fuel in the storage places, in the form of fresh fuel to reload in the reactors. So this configures I would say, potential for something very serious if there was a nuclear accident. So the situation has been fluctuating. I would say there has been a degradation from August 2022, the summer last year, where for the first time the nuclear power plant was shelled, was attacked directly. So this is the most obvious situation that you can have, direct attack, shooting at the plant. So, this is the most egregious and more clear situation that you have. But it's not the only one. There is one that is perhaps, and it might sound paradoxical for the audience, perhaps even more dangerous, because nuclear reactors are very robust. They are prepared, especially after 9/11, they are prepared to withstand an airplane falling into a nuclear power plant. Nothing will happen. All right? So, you have to really go very, very strong and persistently to hurt. Of course, it's an aberration to shoot at the nuclear power plant. But the other thing is the loss of external power. And this happened 6 times already. When you lose external power to the plant, you lose the cooling function of the reactor. And when you lose the cooling, then you can have what happened in Fukushima, for example. The plant with the fuel, which is at very high temperatures, loses this moderating function, and then you have an uncontrolled reaction, and you could have the famous meltdown of a nuclear reactor. So this happened, not a meltdown, but what we had were several moments where the emergency generators, like any emergency generator that you can have in a building or in a private residence, kicks in because you don't have anything else, any other way to perform this function. So the situation is very serious. And my last comment on this would be that, of course, as you know, every international observer and analyst is looking at that. We are facing a offensive or counter-offensive. Militarily speaking, we see a lot of military action and activity. And of course, from my perspective, this increases exponentially the possibility of an accident. Hence, the necessity for us to multiply our efforts to try to prevent that.
Thank you very much. Well, now moving from this awful threat, of course, on the nuclear in Zaporizhia, let's move now to Iran. There is another big threat. Iran is getting closer and closer to building a nuclear bomb. So what else can we do to prevent Iran from building it, but also to prevent nuclear proliferation in the world? Please.
Thank you. The situation in Iran is also a source of enormous preoccupation. The managing of the nuclear program was being carried out in a combination of 2 main factors. On the one hand, we have the normal inspections from the IAEA on the nuclear program in general. But this was enhanced, widened, made bigger and deeper through the famous JCPOA, this agreement signed in 2015, which was left I would say by the decision of the Trump administration in 2018, when the United States withdrew from it. As a consequence of that, Iran, after some time, decided to do the same. In reality, the JCPOA continues to exist, although it is what we could describe as an empty shell, because the main obligations, the nuclear obligations, are not being observed. Also as a retaliatory, if I can use this word, Iran decided to ramp up its nuclear capabilities, which was manifested in two ways. First of all, by increasing dramatically the nuclear infrastructure, building more ultra-centrifuges, modern types of this, establishing new facilities, putting underground some of their capabilities as well, and also by going much higher in terms of the levels of enrichment. As you know, the military or the weapon grade enrichment level of the uranium-235 isotope is 90%, around 90% of this isotope. And Iran, we discovered enrichment levels at 83.4, which is technically the same. And they had been enriching at 60% for quite a long time already, which means, in practical terms, that they have reached the capability, the technical capability to enrich uranium at weapon grade level. So this is no longer something that might happen. It's already a reality. So confronted with that, there were efforts, you may remember, for more than 1 year after the new administration in Washington took over, to try to revive the JCPOA. These negotiations have not been successful so far. There were moments where they were tantalizingly close, apparently, to an agreement, but this was not reached. And at the moment, we are in a sort of a limbo where there are no negotiations. There is a lot of commentary about possibilities of, or not, speculation about the possibility of going back to, but there is no activity whatsoever. Confronted with that, from the agency's standpoint, we decided not to sit on our hands and try to look into ways to, I would say, facilitate some de-escalatory movements. Hence my visit to Tehran in March, where I was able to clinch an agreement with, I saw President Raisi, I saw Foreign Minister Amir Abdollahian, and others, the President of the Atomic Energy Organization of Iran, Mr. Islami. So we decided, or we agreed on a number of partial measures to try to stabilize the situation, to try to increase the monitoring capabilities of the agency. But of course, this is a gradual process, and in a general, I would say, framework that is marked by instability and a high degree of uncertainty. I think we have not yet grappled with the idea of a future without an agreement. And we know that the JCPOA is no longer there, but there is some fiction that it could be revived, which is so far not concrete. From the IAEA, what we try to do is to keep the lines open with Iran. We keep our inspection activities, albeit at a lower level, because as I said in the beginning of our conversation, JCPOA used to give us much more visibility into the program. So this is where the situation lies at the moment.
Thank you very much. Unfortunately, we have to stop here, so thank you again, Mr. Grossi, and thanks also to the panelists, to Abdellatif, Nicola Monti, and Benedict Buebe. Thank you very much, and now we move to the other session.
Global Internet. The end is near. Will artificial intelligence steal our jobs? Is cyberspace